Hannibal and the Hannibal TV mascot Piper here. The daily news update. She's got a jacket on because it's actually quite cold here in Ottawa, Canada today. Went out for a walk, did some DDP yoga, but definitely got a long way to go with my rehabilitation. But let's get into the news. AEW did its best rating since its debut episode this week for Collision, 0.27. The UFC 291 prelims the same night did a 0.30, just beating AEW. Now, for the people that were always saying Saturday night was a bad night for wrestling, Saturday night's main event was the highest rated wrestling show ever for the Hogan Andre episode, and in general, that show did great in the 80s. So Saturday night, it's the best night to draw for wrestling. That's the truth. It's not arguable. It's the best night of the week historically to draw is Saturday nights. And for TV, there's a lot of people home. Now, sadly, Rampage, as I reported earlier today, they did do a daily news update this morning. The link is in the description. Rampage only did a 0.10 rating, which tied for lowest rating of the year. So with the three shows, it appears Rampage is being affected the most. They're doing some angle similar to the Ric Flair WWE angle on AEW where they're saying CM Punk is the real world champion. Sadly, I think one of the same reasons people were saying, I mean, they're doing great. I'm not dissing either company. They're doing great. But I think the same issue as before, like he's the guy he's wrestling, I think it's Ricky Starks, someone that he's feuding with. It's like it's not a very well known guy. Um, I don't know. I think they're ultimately going to have a championship versus championship with MJF, which could be interesting. But see, it seems CM Punk wrestles a lot of guys that people know he's like pretty much know he's going to beat. That's my only critique of that. But he's obviously pulling in good ratings, so I'm not hating on him. Kevin Owens, for some reason, it must have been a slow news day because it's been all over the news that Kevin Owens, his contract ends in a year and a half or something. I think he makes about $3 million a year, last I heard. It's definitely between 2 and 3. He might not actually retire as he had originally thought, because I think he'll be 41 or something at the time if his contract ends. Well, if you're making $3 million a year, of course you're not going to retire unless you have serious injuries, because that's way too good money to stop wrestling. Jericho's in his 50s making around that. He's not going to stop. It's silly to stop wrestling if you're being offered that, because that money is not going to be around forever. Wrestling is going through a boost in popularity, and there is two companies right now. I don't know if UFC is going to pay the wrestlers as much, though, as WWE has been paying them. Uh, It'll be interesting to see how the contract negotiations change once UFC takes over, because they're not exactly known for paying fighters great, other than the very top of the top, like the Conor McGregors and Brock Lesnar's. But all I'm saying is I don't see how this is that big news. I mean, obviously, AEW will probably be interested in Owens at that time too. He's going to be offered a lot of money. Of course, you're probably going to want to stay wrestling, or if you can't wrestle, do something in some capacity in one of the two companies. I mean, he's been wrestling since he was 14. I mean, obviously wrestling's in his blood. But speaking of UFC, Mark Hunt recently did an interview with John Paz. Of course, Mark Hunt famously fought Brock Lesnar in Lesnar's last UFC fight where he failed the drug test. And Mark has done some wrestling too. He did make an interesting point in that interview with John, where he was talking about fighters that failed drug tests in UFC, like, and I'm not hating on any of them, but like Lesnar, Anderson Silva, so many have failed. Alistair Overeem, so many times. I mean, I'm not going to name all the names because I don't know them all off by heart, but there's a lot. Drug test failures are common in MMA. And the point that I found interesting that Mark Hunt made was in sports, like with the cyclist there, and I don't know why his name is escaping me, but the cyclist that basically got his reputation ruined for taking steroids. Someone will mention it in the description. But like in most sports, Ben Johnson, he was absolutely ruined here in Canada for winning the Olympics, for instance, for taking Winstrol back in 1988, I believe it was. His name was dragged through the mud, and the cyclist is somebody else. I don't know why I can't remember his name. But like in MMA, if you fail drug tests, you basically get fined, and your fight is ruled a no contest. The other guy doesn't win, and you're not like barred from the sport. So yeah, Lance Armstrong. So I did think Mark brought up a good point there. And for everyone hating on Mark, I will say this: I do believe he is natural. And Lesnar had the size advantage in that fight. I saw the fight. I was bouncing at a bar that was showing the fight that night. Ronda Rousey, I believe, also lost. Or I believe that may have been, it was near the time that Ronda had one of her last fights too. I believe it was UFC 200. But Lesnar played that fight very safely, used wrestling. He had his huge size advantage, and he couldn't finish Mark, even with whatever PEDs he was taking. So, in other news, at 7 p.m. tonight, Jack Kilby, the executive vice president of Great North Wrestling, who I don't know how credible this guy is when he's going around hitting wrestlers with briefcases during matches. I don't quite know how credible an executive vice president he is. I recently saw a match with I don't know if it's his protege or he's part of his group, the Big Money Players, with Magnum McLaren and this 7-foot bodyguard guy. That's an impressive monster, but they had this kid beat that Magnum was against. He wanted a warm-up match before he faced Jeremy Prophet. And they used a briefcase. I don't know what the punishment. I guess the president's going to have to put some sort of punishment on that, but like, I don't know if that's very becoming behavior of an executive vice president. And speak of the devil, there he is now, live at 7 p.m. The Pope, Elijah Burke, on the Great North Wrestling Podcast. I don't remember the Pope from WWE. I know Jeremy Prophet's a big fan of his. I know he's in NWA now. He did stuff in TNA. I do remember him from TNA. I believe doing a show in Montreal with him around 2010-ish that Val Venus was also on. But we're going to find out about his career. I'll watch that. Richie, I'm having some physical. I'm improving physically every day. Say that. Improving physically every day. Fans seem to be focused on AEW nowadays. I'm neutral. I'm not really a wrestling fan. Everybody that knows me could probably tell I'm legitimately very interested in UFOs. And for people that say, oh, it's because I hate wrestling or I'm a hater, no, I don't watch them. I'm not an MMA fan really anymore either. I watch very little MMA. I follow the news from both. I'm more interested in the behind-the-scenes wrestling news. I'm very interested in it. That's why I report on it. And it's a great job. It's better than a real job. But I'm neutral because I'm not biased to any companies. I'll tell you, between WWE and AEW, I mean, I'm completely neutral. The companies after that, you got NWA, Impact, MLW, and New Japan. WOW, the Women of Wrestling, which I haven't seen much, but it gets better ratings than all three of those other shows. Usually does around a 0.05, where MLW doesn't even have a TV show anymore, neither does NWA. Impact and New Japan usually get about a 0.01. Someone says WWE needs to bring back the 80s style and steroid. They do have TRT, and if you actually look at a lot of the wrestlers, I mean, I'm not hating on them. Wrestling is not MMA fighting. It's not a real sport. It's pretty clear that the testing is very relaxed, and there's ways around stuff in all of the companies now. I mean, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to watch a lot of these guys in WWE. There's a lot of massive wrestlers in WWE and AEW. I mentioned it this morning. I watched the Rampage highlights. There's some really jacked looking guys, and I would say there's a lot of people that have a similar look that they had in the 80s back then. No gimmicks guy, Lance Armstrong, yes. He was ruined. So why do MMA fighters get a pass? I'm just saying that's a very good point that Mark Hunt made in that interview. John Jones, everyone says he's the greatest ever. He's failed tons of drug tests. And he mentioned in that interview they even went to a different state for one of his fights to get around something. But in MMA, people don't care for whatever reason. King of ground and pound, Mark Hunt. I'll still give Mark Coleman that. Although Mark Coleman admittedly wasn't natural. No gimmicks guy claiming it was self-defense. Well, I am not one of the executives of Great North Wrestling, but as a video editor of Great North Wrestling, I guess you could call me, since the show airs on the Hannibal TV. I must say that I thought that was uncalled for, and I don't know what's going on with the whole president thing. I guess we'll find out. I haven't seen the whole event yet. Guess we'll find out what's going on. There is a lingerie wrestling promotion. Lingerie Fighting Championships. Some of the matches on there are better than others. The president is going to be No Gimmick Guy's personal assistant for 30 days. Sean says CM Punk is creepy. No Gimmicks Guy. Jack Kilby says stay tuned for more details. Eric, do a shoot interview with who? Mark Hunt? I did do an audio interview with him in the days before video interviews. I was supposed to interview Greg Valentine this weekend while he was appearing at the Gathering, but apparently he pulled out of his Gathering appearance. He's no longer doing that. Andrew says Elijah Burke is a Louisville native. Everything fell apart. Well, as I said, I'm going to watch the thing and find out. And by the way, if you go to the posts on the Hannibal TV, the Pope is one of the guys that are in the poll of who people would like to see in Great North Wrestling. That I know people in Great North Wrestling are interested to know the fans' response to that, because we want to be a fan-oriented company. Jack Kilby, actually IRS had a Halliburton briefcase, the famous Halliburton briefcases. I did not like the Dark Side of the Ring I was in. I did a whole episode podcast on it. The producers told me they get a lot of their ideas on content and who to use for interviews from my interviews. So the subject matter from my content and Dark Side of the Ring is similar. That's why I've been watching all the shows. I definitely don't like how they buried me, but you know, if you say no to this, first of all, they paid me $1,000, so $1,000 is $1,000, pays some bills. But the other thing is, what happened when Kevin Sullivan didn't do the Chris Benoit interview? For the Chris Benoit one, when they said Kevin Sullivan was asked for comment and refused to comment on the situation. So they made him look bad anyways. So he may as well have just taken the payday and got his side out there somewhat. Even though, like, let's say in the 6 or 7 hours they were at my house, There's maybe 10 minutes of the interview they used, and they cut it up how they wanted to use it. But I'm just saying, according to Kevin, the real reason he didn't do the Chris Benoit Dark Side of the Ring was because he was sick of talking about the Nancy incident, because it's hard on him, and they didn't offer him enough money. So there's always 2 or 3 sides to the story. Sean, I just told you my opinion of the same one. Some of the shows I've liked, some of them I don't. I didn't like the one they did on My Situation. It was biased. The Bam Bam Bigelow episode, I said I liked. The Bam Bam Bigelow episode, I didn't like the Chris Benoit ones. I hated the Chris Benoit ones. Tons of people have concussions. Yes, they can make people, they can affect things, but out of all the people that have concussions, do they all go around killing their wife and kids? No. Does it affect thinking? Yes, but I don't use concussions as a sole excuse for that situation. I'm neutral about it. Someone says Ken Shamrock said he's got hurt more in wrestling than they did in MMA. Well, in wrestling, you're allowing, in MMA you can protect yourself, and if you're a good fighter, you can avoid taking stuff. But in wrestling, sometimes you're putting your body on the line, taking stuff that you wouldn't take in a real fight. For instance, slaps. I would never let anyone slap me in real life, but in wrestling, I've let people slap me many, many times. I mean, when I started in Stampede Wrestling, people would beat me up for real, and I didn't even realize they were roughing me up because I just thought that's how wrestling was. Whereas in real life, I was actually working in bars at that time, and I would never let people treat me like that. So wrestling's interesting. What do I think about Omos? Good look. Yes, Mark Coleman was the king of ground and pound. And I have a 3-hour interview with Mark Coleman on this channel. Someone says that he likes getting lots of interviews. Someone says Joe Rogan would not fight because of a drug test. I don't know anything about that. I do like Joe Rogan, though. Thank you, Brandon. Some of Richie, oh, he's taking Jack Kilby's side. Jay, I'll be honest with you, I was a huge Shawn Michaels fan when he first turned heel. Huge fan. During the days when he was with Sensational Sherry. When I did somewhat like the Rockers. I wouldn't say I was a huge Rockers fan, but I would say around 92, Shawn Michaels was my favorite wrestler. I remember being at events and like marking out like crazy for him. And I remember the Rick Martel, Shawn Michaels Wembley Stadium match was by far my favorite match of that card. I loved it. My grandmother loved it too. Even though she was British and she was happy the Bulldog won that night. But I was never a Bret Hart fan. I always found him boring. I respect him, but I was never a fan of his. But Shawn Michaels, when I never really liked DX, I didn't like Shawn as a babyface champion, but during the period around 92, when he first turned heel, I loved him. So, but Bret Hart, I was never a fan. I liked the Ultimate Warriors, the Psycho Sids, the Ric Flair. Shawn, when he was like the ultimate, it seemed like when he was first fighting for his position is when I liked him. Same with Jericho. I loved Jericho when he was in WCW, fighting for his position, and then when I respect him. He's by far one of the all-time greats. But once he got his position and got comfortable in his position and has his creative say, I didn't like him as much. I loved him in WCW. I remember my one of my friends on my street. We would watch. He died like right after high school from a car accident. But I remember we were both big WCW fans, and I remember we would talk about Chris Jericho when he was calling them Jericho-holics, we were both Jericho-holics. We were talking about, when we were walking to school, when we would catch, like, he lived a little bit further down the street from me, we would always talk about Chris Jericho. Someone says if he wasn't disabled, he would have pursued wrestling and would have loved to wrestle me. Thank you, sir. Oh my gosh, Jack Kilby is too much. Collision is live. Someone says Joe Rogan. Who knows? Once UFC officially merges with WWE, I don't see any reason why there won't be a huge crossover. It only makes sense. Jericho versus Gangrel. There's a Gangrel versus Hannibal and Gangrel versus Bloodhunter match on here. And a great shoot interview I did with Gangrel. Lafayette, Indiana in the house. I've never been there. Never been there. Jay Miller, Dana versus Vince. Could you guys imagine an angle like that? That would be rating. I think that at least for a while, wrestling is going to continue to grow. And hopefully that includes Great North Wrestling too, which Jack Kilby, I mean, we only have done 2 events back. As someone says, he's invading the live feed. And he is interviewing the Pope after this. Give it some time. We had 2 events. Give it some time. There's some big plans for next year. There's another event November 4th. Great North Wrestling hadn't put on an event since the pandemic. So it's going to be back up and going strong as time goes on. It does have by far the most popular wrestling YouTube channel in Canada behind it. 365,000 subscribers. And I thank every one of you for subscribing. You're all great. I really love you guys from the bottom of my heart. Have a great night.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews.